Yes, it's recording now.
So good afternoon, shalom, and welcome to our department seminar here at the University. Today we are honored to host Barbara Gellén. She is a PhD student focusing on the study of looted art during World War II, with an emphasis on the Holocaust in Eastern Europe and the challenges and possibilities of repatriation. She is a Fulbright Scholar in 2021-22. She holds a BA in Art History from Eötvös Loránd University and an MA in Art Management from Budapest Metropolitan University. With a decade of professional experience in the museum field, Barbara has held various positions, including collections care specialist, curator, and registrar. Her primary academic interests center on the cultural and historical impact of National Socialism, particularly as it relates to the theft and restitution of Jewish heritage. And today, she will give a lecture about the Nazi looting to Soviet seizure in Hungary. So, Barbara, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Barbara Gellén. I'm an art historian and currently a PhD student at Rutgers University in New Jersey, as Maria mentioned. And yeah, my research focuses on looted art during World War II and the post-war era in Hungary. And yeah, it aims to examine the challenges and possibilities of restitution today within the framework of cultural heritage. As you can probably already see it from the title of my PowerPoint, which is not what is on the poster, I am more on the chatty side as a presenter. And this is very much a work in progress. The research is really in its first stage. As I just mentioned, I just finished my coursework. So hopefully this is when I'm going to start to do the real work regarding my research. I also want to address that, yeah, we started to talk about this lecture with Marianne last September, probably. So, you know, a lot has happened since that, and the field is evolving quickly. So bear with me. We'll get to provenance research and archival silence probably in like the second half of my lecture. Please holler if something is not okay with the PPT, because that can be very embarrassing. Okay, so just let me reflect on what Marianne said before I jump into the how did we get here. I'd like to quickly address how I got here. So yeah, I was working in Hungarian state museums for the past decade, and I was lucky enough to spend an academic year at Tufts University in Boston, where I first learned about the practice of provenance research. I don't know about you, but having a strong sense of justice is a curse and a blessing at the same time. And really, I was fascinated about the idea that as an art historian, I can contribute to social justice somehow on some level. So I decided to apply to a PhD program. And honestly, I had a very hard time placing my research as it is it's very interdisciplinary. So I need to look at it through the lens of Holocaust studies, modern European history, international law, and I believe this will be mirrored in my talk today as well, because as you see, I would like to give you a brief historical background in the first 10 minutes. I promise I timed it. It's going to be 10, 15 minutes. You know, just in order to understand the forces that shaped the events in Hungary. We're going to talk about the measures of the Allies for protecting cultural heritage, which were very different from each other. I'd like to demonstrate the characteristics of looting and restitution through the case study of a wealthy Hungarian Jewish lineage, the Herzog family, and building up on all these, I'm going to address restitution, the application of related international guidelines, and provenance research in theory in Hungary. Mm-hmm. Let me start by sharing a story. about Ferenc Korin, who was an exceptionally wealthy and influential Hungarian businessman in the 1930s and 1940s. And in March 1944, in an arrangement to avoid deportation and obtain permission to leave Hungary as a Jew, he was forced to give away all his valuables to Nazi officers, some of which were deposited at the Hungarian Commercial Bank. And following the war, the political climate of the communist takeover did not allow him to return, and the artifacts of his deposited collection slowly disappeared. And among them, a work by Flemish artist Salomon van Reus, the view of Beverwijk, so hard to pronounce, sorry. It was one of the paintings, and 78 years later, the painting was identified by Provenance researcher Victoria Reed of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and was successfully returned to his heirs. Korin's story is only one of many ongoing restitution cases. And what made me wonder back in 2022, when I was in Boston at Tufts University, when this event took place, was that while much research has been conducted on looted works from Western Europe, the destiny of Eastern European collectors and their collections remain largely unknown, with only a few exceptions. I have the little images of the people here, but I added, and I'm sorry, probably the links are not working when I'm sharing my screen, but I added the press release of the museum on the right side, but if anyone's interested, you can look it up. So in my case, one of the most important first steps was to define the scope of my research time-wise. So here comes the history lesson, because most research on Nazi era loot begins in 1933, when Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. But for Hungary, the first relevant date is much earlier. It's 1867, which was the year of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise. And why is that? By the Reform era of the 19th century, Emperor Ferdinand I abolished several laws limiting the civil rights of Jewish people in Hungary, including the ban on Jews settling and engaging in commerce in the capital. And that meant that many wealthy Jewish families who already had established businesses in the countryside relocated to Pest-Buda, and they contributed significantly to the city's prosperity. With the compromise, Jewish emancipation was realized, and it was driven not only by imperial interests, but also by Hungarian nationalism, because ethnic Hungarians were concerned about their demographic majority. So they promoted Jewish integration and encouraged Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe and Russia to Hungary. And that was because in exchange for equal civic rights and expanded economic freedom, Jews were willing to assimilate to Hungarian society while also, of course, maintaining a distinct cultural identity. As they were skilled in commerce, Jews played an essential role in modernizing a predominantly agrarian Hungarian economy, which was key in later events. And it all seemed beneficial until the imperial breakdown of 1918. The Treaty of Trianon was part of the peace treaties that concluded World War I in 1920, and it cost Hungary 2/3 of its territory and population, including major sources of raw materials. And the newly formed states shaped new national identities, and the terms of belonging shifted dramatically. And as a result, Jews became scapegoats for unemployment, inflation, and by the 1920s, the economic success of Jewish intellectuals and entrepreneurs provoked resentment among the impoverished segments of society who viewed Jews as beneficiaries of modernization, while they suffered from the devastation of the war and later in 1929, the Great Depression. And so The economic hardships combined with a desire to revise the Trianon borders shaped the country's foreign policy for decades. I might even say that it's not in past tense today. And it paved the way for widespread anti-Semitism. It basically pushed Hungary toward alignment with Nazi Germany. And so the situation became paradoxical because Jews, especially in cities, experienced a peculiar combination of assimilation and discrimination in a country that was navigating political turmoil and economic instability. And I'm going to move to the broader European scene as the environment for art collecting across Europe grew increasingly hostile in the interwar period. Before the outbreak of World War II, Adolf Hitler had already begun the confiscation of Jewish-owned artworks in pursuit of his vision for a temple of German art, the Führer Museum in Linz. This simultaneously meant excluding what was not desirable for true German art. And this culminated in the 1937 Entartete Kunst Degenerate Art Exhibition in Munich, which was a turning point in Nazi cultural politics. What's important for my research is that in the early years, the Nazi Party lacked a clear strategy of a systematic government-supported and legally sanctioned plunder, which supports the argument of functionalist historians who see Nazi policies as the result of cumulative radicalization rather than one central intention, as opposed to the intentionalist point of view. And so it was inconsistent. The network of Europe was intertwined, which created a chaotic situation. But the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda was established in 1934 with Joseph Goebbels at its helm. And they ordered all artists to become members to practice their crafts legally, but they only allowed members of Aryan descent. So the Nazis effectively excluded Jews and other undesirable groups from the art world, making it impossible for them to make a living. And after that, by the time of Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, the mechanisms of looting were functioning with systematic efficiency with the help of the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, sorry for my German, which doesn't exist, whose core activities included the confiscation of artworks, libraries and archives, and their inventorying, their transportation and storage. And their purpose was also to contribute to the Führer Museum and to enrich the private collections of leading Nazi officials, most notably Hermann Göring, who personally selected artworks from confiscated items. But interestingly, the Nazis found themselves in a paradoxical situation, choosing between the desire to destruct versus the desire to destruct the artworks versus seizing them, because even if an artwork was not living up to the standards of the Nazi German ideal, they were still able to sell them for hard currency to finance the war. And the specificity of Hungary compared to other states in the Reich's orbit lay in the fact that it was both a collaborator and later an occupied country. While Hitler desperately needed Hungary for its raw materials and strategic position in protecting the borders, Hungarians wanted to keep valuables for their own nation, which led to both Nazis and Hungarians exploiting Jews for their own purposes. And after the Hungarian government's failed attempt to exit the war, Germany invaded Hungary, and the ghettoization of Hungarian Jews began in April 1944. However, the plundering of their assets could not have succeeded without the assistance of Hungarian authorities. Similarly to Nazi leaders, officers eagerly contributed to the plundering for their own financial gain, and they worked closely with Hungarian museums. Among the most notable and devastating examples was the case of the Herzog family's collection, which was one of the most important private art collections in Europe at the time. But before I talk about their case, I want to stop here with the historical background and talk a little bit about the immediate post-war responses by the Allies in locating and saving collections in Europe, collections similar to the Herzogs, because those events defined how Hungary dealt and deals with restitution in the 20th century and today. So in the immediate post-war period, the Allied forces sent troops to locate and secure cultural heritage of the persecuted groups. But as I mentioned, different countries had different ideas about saving artworks. And in territories liberated by Western allies, the task of recovery was executed by the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archive Section Unit, or commonly known as the Monuments Man, which was established in 1943. And the unit fought alongside the army to mitigate war damages. They had no blueprint for how to carry out such missions. They were tasked with locating, rescuing, and documenting cultural objects confiscated by the Nazis, and they were also responsible for facilitating their return with the help of the central collecting point in Munich, where objects were divided into two categories. There were the artworks of questionable provenance and artworks belonging to Nazi-occupied countries. And each concerned country, Hungary as well, established its own committee of cultural representatives. And by following strict legal measures, the holdings were returned en bloc beginning in 1946. But events played out differently for countries that were liberated by Soviet troops. Unlike the protective measures of the Monuments Man, at the core of Soviet cultural policy stood revenge and the notion of compensation instead of restitution. The Soviet leadership regarded the large-scale seizure of cultural property as legitimate reparation for their wartime losses. So their so-called trophy brigades primarily aimed to enrich the collections of their own national museums with a very much an eye for an eye rhetoric. And similarly to Hitler, Stalin had a vision of a Russian super museum housing both national art and the trophies of Axis countries. However, in order to keep the plunder secret in the Cold War environment, the plan never got executed, leaving the confiscated works hidden from the public and from scholars. And trophy brigades were led by the directors of major Russian museums, such as the Pushkin Museum, the Tretyakov Gallery, and the Hermitage. Their teams composed of art historians, museum officials, restorers, and artists, all commissioned as officers. And similarly to the Monuments Man, they deployed directly behind the advancing Red Army. And eventually they confiscated more than 2.5 million fine art objects, books, and archival documents beginning in February 1945. And during their operations, the brigades not only seized but simultaneously destroyed cultural properties, sometimes their own. They burned crates, frames, used historically significant fabrics to keep themselves warm, and they also shipped entire holdings to Moscow without selection, which endangered. These selections were endangered by repeatedly loading and unloading them during long train rides, exposing them to severe weather and damp storages. And This way, many undocumented artifacts arrived in Moscow, if they arrived at all, which created an opportunity for officials to enrich or even start their private collections. Hungarian claims began to emerge as early as the summer of 1945, already under Soviet control. Several collectors who had entrusted their properties to the Hungarian General Credit Bank contacted government ministers to inquire about the whereabouts of their belongings. And the most common response they got was that the inventoried artifacts had been taken by the Russian Economic Officers Commission. We know that Soviet military officers had forcibly opened the rented compartments of banks and emptied them. And here you can see the iconic director of the Pushkin Museum of the time, Irina Antonova, who was involved both in looting and after exchanging letters between the Hungarian and Soviet government, the return of 15 artworks to Hungary in 1971. And this transport included national treasures by Mihály Munkácsy, József Ripurónai, and Bertalan Székely. Interestingly, although these works had been privately owned before the war, they were placed in state museums where they remain today. And what made it more difficult for individual claims was that communist ideology regarded private property as a bourgeois construct and prioritized state ownership. So restitution was further impeded by economic restrictions, as the state required individuals seeking to reclaim their possessions to pay a customs fee amounting to 10% of the item's assessed value, and those unable to pay had their properties confiscated by the customs office as a repatriation fee. Okay. So now let's see how events unfolded in the case of the Herzog family. And here I rely heavily on art historian Péter Molnos's research that he published in his book, Stolen Legacy. So the Herzog family arrived in Buda from Lovasberény, a town of some 4,300 people with a significant Jewish community, just 60 kilometers from the capital. They arrived in the 19th century, and in the second half of the 1840s, Herzog Moses Löbel and his brother Rudolf founded their shipping company. And back then, little did they know that their newly established business laid the foundations of one of the most significant Hungarian private art collection for the coming centuries. And from 1855, the son of Moses, Peter Herzog, carried on his father's legacy. And in 3 decades, he found himself in the narrow elite circle of Hungarian millionaires. He was a lifelong patron of the arts and a committed person of social responsibility who received the Baron title for his family in 1904. And Peter's oldest son, Baron Morlipót Herzog, became the leader of the company in 1914. But despite his parents' philanthropic attitude and community engagement, he regarded art collecting primarily as a private investment. Molnos points out that his evolution as a collector was rather traditional. After satisfying his numismatic interest, he started to buy furniture and other objects of applied arts, eventually investing in paintings. The pace of collecting sped up when he met Marcel Nemes, a key figure in the Hungarian art scene at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. Based on contemporary sources, their relationship was rather stormy, and the role of Nemes in selecting artworks for the Baron's collection I feel like it's still subject to a debate in the historiography of Hungarian art history, but it is undeniable that Nemes was the one who turned Herzog into a serious collector with a sophisticated taste for art. By 1911, articles and interviews had confirmed the greatness of the Baron's collection, which was housed in the Herzog Palace at 93 Andrássy Boulevard, or he might move it there in 1960, whatever, I need to look that up. And the most thorough description of the interior was presented in the prominent Leipzig newspaper, art newspaper, Der Cicero. And since many of the Herzog's artworks are still lurking, and the Baron was not keen on lending his pieces to exhibitions, meaning researchers lack his exact inventory, the importance of this Der Cicero article lies in the fact that one can get a fuller spectrum of the works he once owned. The core of his collection consisted of 19th century Flemish and Dutch still lifes, landscapes, paintings of Spanish romanticists, modern French masterworks, and the Baron obtained Europe's largest collection of Agrico's works at a total 7 paintings by the Greek artist at the time. With the establishment of the Socialist Federative Republic of Councils in Hungary in March 1919, artworks as private properties had to be listed and handed over to the council. And this measure affected 157 families in Hungary. And in April, the Herzog family's assets were taken away as well. The pieces of what researchers call the first largest state-assisted loot in Hungary, and what also displayed the golden age of Hungarian art collecting. So its pieces were exhibited as national treasures in the Kunsthalle in Budapest. But fortunately, when the Republic of Councils collapsed, the assets of the Herzogs were all returned, and this inventory of the artworks later proved to be a key document for Provenance research regarding the destiny of the collection. After Baron Lipót-Mór Herzog passed away in 1934, his widow remained the owner and caretaker of the properties. She managed to hold the collection together until her death in 1940, when their 3 children, András, Erzsébet, and István, sold the company and divided the inheritance equally among themselves. And amid the stormy events of the 1940s and the newly promulgated anti-Jewish laws, the urban middle class and bourgeoisie started to invest and save their capital abroad, including their art collections, and the Herzogs placed their most valuable items in the Manfred Bay steel and metal works in Budafok, in their properties in Buda, and their relatives in the village of Sirok. But soon after German troops invaded Hungary in March 1944, an Aero Cross team unfortunately discovered the crates, which were labeled with the monograms of the siblings. And they were opened, surrounded by huge media attention to show that such significant artworks were hidden from the Hungarians' public eye. And some items were taken to the central collecting point in Munich, ironically, even further from that public eye, but that happened under a light surveillance. The oldest son, András, was taken to labor camp in 1942, and he never returned, but 2 of the 3 siblings survived the Holocaust. István stayed in Hungary and passed away in 1966, and Erzsébet fled to the United States, and their heirs are still fighting to reclaim their belongings. And as a curiosity, I added a slide from the website of the Barnes Foundation of one of their Renoir paintings, the Amnot family. Although this was sold on time, this shows how the provenance information of an artwork should look like. And I just encourage everyone to take a look at other institutions' websites, specifically in Eastern Europe, and compare. So fast forward in time, What were the options of the heirs when the practices of restitution and provenance research started to evolve in the post-war period? What is restitution? What is provenance research? There are many definitions, but restitution is a process of reconciliation and restoration of something taken, stolen, or lost. Restitution often involves varied combinations of diplomatic, political, and administrative work between governments for the transfer and relocation of objects, artworks, and human remains, as well as the involvement of local agents and associations. This is probably my most boring slide, and I apologize for that. You don't have to read it. But since there is no single binding international law that specifically governs Nazi-era confiscated cultural property and its restitution, I want to show you that those who have claims or conduct research can rely on conventions and principles. As far as I know, previously, claims were treated as human rights questions within the framework of international law. And so, as you see, we have guidelines roughly from every 20 years. Some are more recent as the topic gets more attention, but we'll see what will happen. But in practice, restitution depends largely on national legal systems and courts operating within this hybrid international ethical framework, not to mention the institutional will. And that is why it's important to be able to gain as much information as possible about an object's history, which falls under provenance research. That is what I promised to talk about on the events poster. I heard that there have already been lectures on provenance research at this series, but here it is, my interpretation. The word itself, provenance, derives from the French term meaning origin or cause. Its origins date back to 18th century France. In the era of Enlightenment, the need to organize and structure knowledge about objects gained significance with the growing number of art experts, collectors, and art dealers who were in need of a compass on the secondary market of cultural goods. And the aim of their research was twofold. It helped identify the authorship and the previous owners of a work, and with such knowledge, it determined the price of artworks on the market by increasing their reputation. And the need for a clean title became important again in the 1990s with renewed interest in the Holocaust. So provenance research is an instrument that enables scholars, collectors, institutions, and anyone concerned to obtain information about an object's history, including its ownership, transfer, and movement. And the full provenance history challenges the traditional idea of museum ownership and has the potential to provide rightful title. Such research also reveals a pattern of collecting habits of an individual or even the trends of a social class, the historic events that leave a mark on an epoch, and the geographic area. One can find data on the changing ownership of artworks in the archives and fortunately today in online databases as well. I previously mentioned that the work conducted in the central collecting point in Munich was, I believe, as transparent as possible, which was not necessarily the case in Eastern Europe. But with the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, post-Soviet states stopped existing in isolation and started to open up. Until then, socialism treated minority issues as a taboo, but now greater attention is given to personal narratives and identities within academia as well. And simultaneously, a new generation, which was personally affected in their family by the Holocaust, was growing up, which sparked a new interest in the demographic, the social and economic challenges of the 20th century. And a major challenge in current research is that writing scholarship with an Eastern European historical lens has typically meant focusing either on Nazi looting in Eastern Europe or on cultural property seized by Soviet troops from Western Europe. But by contrast, the Soviet looting within Eastern Europe itself, including the Baltic states, the Slavic regions, Poland, Romania, the Balkans, and Hungary, it seems to remain understudied. And I believe that one of the main reasons for this is that scholars in museums and archives who are proficient in these languages and have access to the archives are not allowed to speak out, which creates a new kind of archival silence. And we know of many lurking artifacts from unreliable sources of institutional oral histories, which is the LinkedIn description of gossip, basically. So now, armed with the knowledge on restitution, international guidelines, and provenance, we can see that such was the legal environment when, in 1999, Martha Nierenberg, the granddaughter of Baron Morliput Herzog, sued the Republic of Hungary, 3 art museums, and the Budapest University of Technology and Economics in a United States Metropolitan Court to recover the family's artifacts. At trial level, she won the case. However, the Hungarian state refused to return 10 out of 12 masterpieces, and they declined to pay litigation costs as well. This expressed rejection of museums demonstrated that the institutional will, the intent to comply with the guidelines, and again, we're just 1 year after the Washington Conference principles, it was entirely absent. And now why is that? On the one hand, in the age of universal museums, large institutions do not want to part with heritage that makes them stand out. Just look at the case of the Benin bronzes or the British Museum's persistence of keeping the Parthenon marbles. On the other hand, due to the funding of museums, deaccession is simply not permitted in Hungarian museums as opposed to the American ones. Now, it is a different procedure, deaccession and restitution. It's absolutely not the same, but ultimately, it is a legal procedure and it means losing an object from the museum's collection. And back to the Herzogs, the second-degree judgment did not yield results either. The heirs of the family decided to take further legal action in 2010. This time, the great-grandson of Baron Herzog, David de Chapelle, and his cousins fought the appellants for holding back 40 works valuing over $100 million, which belonged to the Herzogs. And they also insisted that the museums compile and hand over to them an inventory of all the Herzog-related artifacts in their possession. I cannot pronounce this word. The Hungarian state appealed, and the family's request was declined, claiming that the American court was not competent in the case and it's not considered as international court. And they also cited an agreement from 1973 that ruled that the Hungarian state has already compensated victims settling down in the United States. I'm not a lawyer. I am currently in the process of tangling out what is happening now with the family. They actually have a website where they compiled all the documents on the case. But despite the years' persistent legal pursuit for restitution, an agreement with the Hungarian state is still not settled as of 2026. I have to admit, it's been a while since I last checked what's happening with the case, but it's a very telling story of the situation in the area. So what's next? Where do we go from here? how to proceed with restitution and provenance research in countries that were once Nazi collaborators and later satellite states of the Soviet Union. There are successful cases, such as the one I mentioned, the one of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the heirs of Ferenc Korin, but they are exceptions rather than the rule. And the unresolved case of the Herzog family demonstrates exactly that. So the task remains challenging, with largely due to continued reluctance to engage with the growing demands for restitution. It would be naive not to stress the role of politics. Culture is power. The political choices result in the lack of institutional will, despite many researchers of the museum would like to see a change. They just cannot do anything about it without support of the leadership. There's definitely a raised public awareness towards the issue. Don't forget that the war in Ukraine has reinforced the practice of wartime plunder and generated a new wave of cultural war crimes. But a positive current trend is the establishment of provenance research departments in museums, and that supports the fact that the issue of restitution has become more crucial than ever. Now, I am more familiar with what's going on in American institutions nowadays. I hear a lot of people being skeptical, judging from the ivory tower of their offices, but institutions as the Getty, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the Metropolitan Museum, they really are pioneers in making a change. And I have to say that now I'm getting optimistic. But this lecture would have ended on a very different note 3 months ago. And I'm excited for Hungarian researchers now. I hope they or we will have the courage and the support to break this archival silence. And just to conclude my presentation, I want you to remember these people, the good and the bad, those who had agency, those who had not, and think about how the plunder of Jewish property, both material and cultural, was not a series of isolated crimes. It was a coordinated and ideologically driven campaign. And these acts of dispossession, whether carried out by Nazi agents, local collaborators, or opportunistic institutions, they represented a concerted effort to erase Jews from public life, historical memory, and cultural legacy. And some of the confiscated pieces were seized by force, while others were handed over voluntarily by Jewish families in the hope that museums and banks would safeguard them until their owners could return home. But 67% of Hungarian Jews never returned to claim their belongings. And through the plunder, Holocaust survivors were not only robbed of their their material wealth, but also had their identities and thus their culture profoundly violated. And in my opinion, today failure to return looted artifacts to their rightful owners serves as a constant reminder of genocide and the broader war crimes committed against these communities. So on that note, I would like to thank you for your attention and for bearing with me. And if you have any comments or questions, please hang around. I also had my email address somewhere. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Barbara, for this wonderful lecture. Now we'll open the floor for questions and comments. So please, maybe if you stop share, we can see each other.
Yeah, totally. If I know how to do that.
Yes, so now yeah, we can see each other.
Yeah.
So maybe I will start. So my question is, what do you think, how the the change in the political life in Hungary will impact this provenance research in Hungary? Or do you think it's not that an important change?
Well, that's a very good topic. I don't know if you noticed that I tried to keep like a very objective note. I am hopeful because I don't know if anyone follows the political events in Hungary. There's a new government new government since May, Péter Magyar, and I already seen that they immediately took measures regarding culture. Measures that I see as a former museum worker crucial. And knowing their rhetorics and knowing their, I have to say, aggressive work so far, I do have a feeling that at some point they're going to address this issue as well. That it's not okay to just know about things from, gossips in museums, and that if we want to belong to Europe, if we want to belong to a progressive cultural sphere, we just cannot avoid these discussions, which are hard, not always successful. Probably most of the times they are not, but we do have to address these kind of social injustices. So that's, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. So Miriam, please.
I cannot hear you, Miriam. You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. So thank you very much for this really important, interesting, and excellent lecture. So I learned a lot, and thank you. Now, I have two questions that I'm not sure if you can answer, but I was just thinking and kind of aroused my curiosity. Aside from Herzog family that you took like a case study, did you research other Jewish collectors, and whether you also came across the collections of avant-garde art, especially Hungarian avant-garde art that was looted? So this is one question. And the other is whether there was any looting also happening after 1956 revolution. I know that it was already period of massive looting during the Nazis and Soviets and so on. But again, Jews, not only Jews, a lot of people were fleeing Hungary. And the question is if they were leaving something behind and what happened to these properties, especially if they're connected to art. So there's two questions I have.
Thank you so much. Those are great questions. And let me first reflect on the second one, because that is something I have not looked at yet. Also, I would think that it's a little bit probably easier to research just because of, the time span. I believe there are more ears or still people who are alive who can talk about it. I don't know if, because, they were not forced to leave the same way Jews were put in ghettos and then deported. So
not only Jews, I mean,
the
felt threatened,
Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, so I don't know about that. That definitely worth exploring, and I actually took a note of that because that could be very useful for my research. You were asking about other collections. I briefly looked at the Hatvani collection. I mentioned this book. I'm just gonna write it in the chat, by Molnos Péter. He, I don't want to lie, but he traces down 4 or 5 wealthy Hungarian Jewish families' assets. And at this stage, I built my research heavily on what he had written. And avant-garde, I would say, I just recently came across, he was not Jew, but the ambassador Nicholas Shalgo, who came to the US, and he established a foundation. And I found that he had very interesting avant-garde artworks. But I am sure, like, I don't want to say something that's not true. So I am sure that Molnos Péter has more information about other about other collections. But yeah, for me, I mostly looked at the Herzog family, the Hatvany family. They were actually related by marriage because the daughter of Baron Herzog Morlipót, Erzsébet, she married a Hatvany heir.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really
if you're interested, thank you. If you're interested, I'm happy to send more resources in English language. So this Molnos könyv, it's very hard to find, but that's the gold mine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We have something in the chat.
That's me.
That's you. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So thank you very much. It was really a very interesting lecture. And I was wondering, because I looked at your case study from the Viennese perspective, as I'm located in Vienna, and I know that the restitution cases were very much involved with the Jewish community in Vienna. Yeah, with the head of the Jewish community having a special interest in the restitution. There was also a scandal in the United States with the Schiele paintings. So they were then they forced the government to take some steps about an official restitution law. And then each museum had to take responsibility. Mostly it was in official institutions rather than private, like galleries that were.
Yes.
And I was wondering if there's something parallel, and then this is the legal background, and the culture background is that we worked on, pointing out the specific role of the Jews in producing modernism in Vienna, which is very similar to the case studies of Budapest. There are many parallels and there are interconnection, Anna Lesnier, the family, and many others. So I was wondering if there is like a legal process now initiated by the Jewish community in Budapest. I know it's split, but still. And if there is a kind of a backup in Budapest to acknowledge the role of the Jews in producing modernism there.
Thank you for the question. Great question. I don't know of any cases that specifically come to the Jewish community in Hungary, but I feel like you raise a very peculiar case when you mention Vienna, because they were not liberated the same way that Budapest was. And I think that they have a very, they have the Klimt painting, The Woman in Gold, which had a huge public interest. And I believe that kind of set a blueprint for restitution. And also about modernism. The reason I feel modernism is heavily present when we're talking about restitution in the era is that because as we talked about the Antarctica Kunst exhibition, the artworks of modernist artists who were often Jews, they were confiscated by the Nazis these modernist and avant-garde paintings were exhibited at the exhibition in Munich. And then, they were either sold, destroyed, or taken to the United States mostly. So their road is again very distincting as opposed to, I don't know, Hungarian masters of Mihály Munkácsy or Bertalan Székely. These cases from Vienna got, I feel like, bigger media attention for sure. Again, I don't know if that answers the question, but I also I do have to look at the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies to look at the cases and
Well, we have several experts. I mean, there are several experts like Sophie Lilly, who I would recommend you to address her, could probably give you some advice. I mean, if you need any advice, because it seems as if you have done your work well. Sophie Lilly, I think, is the Sophie Lilly. I would write it.
Thank you.
She wrote the big book about the Jewish art collections in Vienna, and she's still working on it. She's still working. She did research on the Steiner family, which partly also related to the Klimt patronage, and so she would be a good contact for you here.
Thank you so much.
There are others, but she's, I think, the woman I would recommend.
Thank you. I took a note of her name. I'm also like in the process of seeing like what's the scope is going to be of my research. So yeah, we'll see about Vienna, how it's gonna fit in the picture. My advisor is really great in keeping me focused. Like whenever I'm starting to, but there was this and there was that, and in this country, and in 1776 this happened. She's like, no. Yeah.
But since you are doing a great job in reflecting about the cultural meaning of restitution, you should be able to look at the other countries to show the relevance of it to contemporary culture.
Yes, I am at Rutgers. I am in the Department of Art History, but I'm also on the Cultural Heritage track. So I try to, and I'm very interested in history as well. So that's why it was very hard for me to find out if it belongs to art history or history, or what's the best fit for my research. And what was I gonna say? Yeah. I lost it. I'm interested. That's it.
Thank you. So thank you, Barbara, again for this lecture. And thank you to all other speakers and the audience for this very productive and engaging semester. And I wish you a restful break this summer. And that's it. Thank you again. And maybe see you next year. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.